afternoon naps and longevity, are they connected? So, could you explain to us, what is the answer to this question? Because it's a very interesting question. I guess we all love to have an afternoon nap from time to time. So, yeah. So, what's the answer to this question and the scientific evidence that supports this answer, essentially?
Yes, also this was also a surprise for me because, to be honest, sometimes I'm writing down pieces that are obvious. No, for example, eat fruit and vegetables, be active. We know that is correct. But for example, napping in the afternoon, I had no idea that was so beneficial for
Mm.
the brain. In this particular paper, they were taking consideration the brain size, and we know that brain size is how we could call it, like a proxy for mental health sometimes. Because, for example, in many neurodegenerative diseases, the dimension of the brain would reduce. There's a shrinkage of the brain,
Mm.
or some specific area of the brain. Let's put it that way; it's more correct. And they would observe, those scientists, that people that would take those small, because they need to be small, less than 30 minutes,
Mm.
small naps in the afternoon, they would have bigger brain. And for the moment, it's a correlation. Again, as we said before, correlation are cool because I think they point where to look at rather than they tell me what's going on, right? So correlation is just a cool place to start,
Mm-hmm.
because we never know. In fact, I put it in the article, like I wrote it. We don't know if the people with the bigger brain, they would nap in the afternoon, or the other way around. So people that nap in the afternoon, they would develop like a bigger brain. We don't know. At the moment, we don't know. We only know that people that nap in the afternoon, they have a bigger brain. And I think this is really a good starting point to do research to understand, first, bigger brain corresponds to like increase the cognitive ability, for example. So I don't know, I have more memory, I can do more stuff, more, I don't know, cognitive task, etc.
Mm.
And then what I think it's important to understand, but I think also they kind of address it. I would like to understand what is the cause and what is the consequence.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, in this paper, they would use this Mendelian randomization.
Okay.
So basically, it's a new, let's call it new, because recently it's becoming more uh, famous
Mhm.
way of dividing the groups inside the experiments. So in the past, you would simply take a population and divide it into groups, like randomly.
Yeah.
Now, what I think people are tending to do more is to use Mendel. So Mendel was a scientist of the past
Yeah.
that would study genetics. I think was one of the first geneticists.
Mhm.
So was studying um, how genetics works, and he was doing that with the, I don't know how to call it in English, those small plants.
Is it? I think it was
The
bees he was using. I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure.
exactly, bro.
Yeah.
Exactly,
We
exactly.
we did it 6, 7 years ago now. Back in
Exactly. And also for that, I
Mhm.
forgot. But basically, Mendel understood how genetic works. And so, if I have blue eyes and my wife has blue eyes,
Mm.
probably our kids will be blue eyes. Those
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mendelian
Mhm.
stuff.
Yeah.
But Mendelian randomization means that instead of dividing the population into groups randomly, I would check at their genes and divide them according to them. So it's unbiased because it's really like I put together people only according to their genetics. So I have no idea what they do in their life, habits, whatever. I only divide them according to the genetics. And so I don't have bias. I give you an example of a bias. For example, I want to know. Also, I give you a real example. In the past, in the last, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago,
Mhm.
people realized that the cheese or like fats were bad for the organism. Right? There was a moment in which everything was like fat free. The fat were like evil, And people were doing these studies in which they were associating the amount of fat that you would eat during the day and the mortality. No, and for example, in US, there was a clear correlation between the amount of fat that you would eat and the mortality. More fat you eat, and more you die.
Yeah.
This makes sense.
Mm.
In France, they were doing the same studies, but they found that was not true. So indeed, it was called the French paradox, because in France, guys, they eat a lot of cheese
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they are famous for the cheese. But there was not a correlation between the amount of cheese and the mortality.
Mm.
No, and the people, they were wondering, what's going on in France. And at some point, some epidemiologists said, no, we understood why, because in France they also drink red wine. And in the past, they thought that the red wine was protective for cardiovascular disease. And they said, okay, they eat a lot of cheese, but they also drink wine, so they don't die. No, but then later, they realized that this was a bias. Why was a bias? Because basically, the people that they were eating a lot of cheese, they were also drinking wine.
Mm.
They were also the people, the richest of the population.
Okay.
And so, if you select rich people, the mortality is lower compared to the
Of course.
poor people, right? And so this type of a bias, because basically you are simply taking into consideration maybe two parameters, but then you are not taking into consideration the other parameters,
Mm.
and you may do a mistake because you think, okay, the wine is protective and the cheese, for example, is a risk factor. Was totally wrong.
Mm.
Today we know that, for example, red wine has basically zero protection toward any type of disease. It's also increased the mortality. Cheese, it depends. But we know, for example, that if you are rich, your mortality is lower compared if you're poor.
Mm.
So that was a very long example to explain what is a bias. Just to, at the end of the story,
Mm.
Mendelian randomization, in theory, reduce this type of bias.
Yeah.
And nowadays, a lot of these studies are done with the Mendelian randomization.
Okay.
And just to conclude, in the napping experiment, they were doing Mendelian randomization, and in theory, with Mendelian randomization, you are excluding this type of people that would sleep more because they have bigger brain,
Mm.
because you are dividing the population in a way that you cannot observe that. So, in theory, if you do a small nap in the afternoon, you would increase the size of your brain and potentially also your cognitive ability, let's say.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, and just staying on the point of like sleep and its importance, really. Um, I'm pretty sure this was the book of Why We Sleep by Professor Walker that I read, and there was a study done on. I'm not sure of the details of the study, but it was done on people that had slept 4 hours as opposed to those who slept eight, and both those sort of groups of people were compared, and the people that slept 4 hours, they had 70% less natural killer cells circulating their system, and obviously, just for my audience, natural killer cells being sort of cells that they're part of the immune system and they fight off things like cancers before they sort of start developing. So that's just astonishing, really. How much the 4 hours of sleep can have such a big impact on your ability to fight off cancers and other infections and things like that, which is it's really fascinating.